Welcome to you, son of a witch.
Uh-huh.
This week, we're undertaking a wizarding probe into two wild tales from the world of flash fiction.
Right.
Stories brimming with sons of witches and fantastical creatures,
Yeah.
served up with all the excitement of a fantasy film or a best-selling epic series.
For sure.
So get ready to dive into these flash fiction stories.
Yeah.
We're going to explore the raw power of elemental magic
Yeah.
and the deadly dance between ice and fire.
Okay.
And if you're enjoying these explorations,
Yeah.
rate and follow you, son of a witch age, for more.
Yeah, definitely.
More of that action.
More of that good stuff.
Yeah.
Now, what's really fascinating about this week's wizarding probe?
Well, what's fascinating as we begin our wizarding probe
Yeah.
is how these concise narratives can take figures we think we know from history
Right.
and completely reimagine them through the lens of elemental magic.
Right.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the role of the individual in shaping events.
And how one fantastical twist could send history down a completely different path.
Yeah, it really does get you thinking about that.
Yeah.
And our first wizarding probe
Okay.
takes us straight to the legend of Genghis Khan.
Okay.
But as you'll see, not quite the version you might remember from the history books.
Right.
In this flash fiction story, Wrath of the Khan, he's not just a brilliant military mind.
Yeah.
He's a powerful elemental wizard.
That's right.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
The story throws us into the life of a young Temujin, an exiled warrior mage.
Okay.
What's the initial picture we get of him?
So the story immediately paints Temujin as an outsider,
Yeah.
leading a small and likely desperate band of followers.
Right.
He's been labeled a thief, existing on the fringes of society.
Yeah.
But his defining characteristic, the thing that sets him apart and that the narrative emphasizes,
Yeah.
is his raw and unpredictable earth magic.
Yeah.
It's presented as his primary advantage, almost a primal force that inspires fear and perhaps a lack of understanding in others.
Right.
It makes you consider how perceptions of power can shift when something so fundamental as the very ground beneath your feet
Right.
can be manipulated.
Exactly. You can almost feel the ground shake when you read about him slamming his fist into the frozen earth and causing tremors.
Right.
It's this untamed power that catches the attention of Jamuka, a chieftain who wields fire magic.
Right.
Talk about a fundamental clash of forces.
Absolutely.
What happens when these two come together?
Well, their alliance really becomes the driving force in the early part of the story.
Okay.
Jamuka represents a more established form of power.
Right.
Someone who clearly revels in the overt displays of his destructive fire magic.
Yeah.
Temujin, even though he recognizes the alliance as potentially a gilded trap,
Right.
sees it as an opportunity.
Okay.
He's shown to be quite strategic learning,
Yeah.
crucial tactics and horsemanship from Jamuka.
Yeah.
But perhaps more importantly, he's also continuing to develop his own earth magic.
Right.
The stark contrast between their magical styles,
Okay.
Jamuka's visible fiery destruction versus Temujin's more grounded and subtle manipulations of the earth,
Yeah.
highlights different approaches to wielding power.
Yeah.
What does that contrast tell you about their characters right from the start?
It suggests Jamuka is perhaps more outwardly aggressive, relying on spectacle,
Yeah.
while Temujin is more internal, perhaps more patient and observant in how he uses his abilities.
That's a good point.
And that contrast explodes in their first major battle, doesn't it?
Oh, it does.
It sounds like absolute magical chaos unleashed.
It is a truly chaotic scene.
Yeah,
The story vividly describes fire and earth clashing on a grand scale.
right.
And then you have the added element of wind magic being used by shamans on both sides.
Wow.
It's elemental warfare in its purest form.
Yeah.
But what's consistently highlighted as a key difference is Temujin's raw, desperate hunger.
Right.
It suggests a level of drive and ambition that Jamuka, perhaps secure in his existing power, lacks. This hunger, this almost primal need for something more,
Right.
becomes a defining trait for Temujin.
Right.
You have to wonder what fuels that kind of desperation.
Right. And that desperation seems to lead to a pretty ruthless turning point.
Yeah.
Temujin doesn't just overpower Jamuka in a direct magical confrontation.
Well, he doesn't.
He uses his wits and a completely unexpected element,
Right.
water,
Yeah.
in a truly cunning way.
Yes. This is a pivotal moment that really underscores Temujin's strategic mind.
Okay.
He doesn't just rely on the most obvious or destructive elements.
Right.
He cleverly utilizes what the story calls the overlooked element of water,
Right.
specifically the freezing of spilled blood,
Wow.
to ensnare Jamuka's warriors.
Wow.
It's an ingenious, almost insidious application of magic.
Right.
And it signals his willingness to be utterly ruthless in his pursuit of power.
Yeah.
It's not just about raw magical strength.
Okay.
It's about outthinking his opponents and using every available resource, no matter how seemingly insignificant. What does this tell you about the nature of warfare, even when magic is involved?
It makes you think that adaptability and unexpected tactics can often trump brute force.
I think so.
And from that moment, Temujin takes on the mantle of Genghis Khan,
Right.
and the unification of the Mongol tribes begins.
Yes.
It's fascinating how the story directly links his mastery of elemental magic to his ability to command and conquer.
Absolutely. The very name Genghis Khan becomes intertwined with his elemental prowess in this reimagining.
Yeah.
The story strongly suggests that tribes are brought under his banner not solely through fear of his military might,
Right.
but also through awe and perhaps even terror at his magical abilities.
Yeah.
And for those who dared to question his authority,
Whoa.
the narrative implies their fates were swift and decisive.
Right.
This establishes the foundation of his empire, built on a combination of magical dominance and an iron will.
Yeah.
It really makes you consider how different historical empires might have been
Right?
if their leaders possessed such powers.
But the story doesn't end with the unification.
It doesn't.
Genghis Khan faces a new and significant challenge.
Right.
A heavily walled city defended by a sorcerer priest who commands the power of lightning.
Okay.
This sounds like his ultimate test.
Yeah.
A confrontation between his raw, desperate power
Right.
and the entrenched authority and magical tradition of the city.
Yeah.
So,
So this encounter truly highlights the potential limitations
okay.
of even the most formidable traditional defenses.
Right.
When faced with innovative, albeit brutal applications of magic.
Right.
The city, with its centuries of tradition and power used to coddle and control,
Okay.
represents a completely different kind of authority
Yeah.
compared to the nomadic tribes Genghis Khan has conquered.
Right.
The sorcerer priest's lightning initially proves to be a significant obstacle,
Okay.
effectively repelling Genghis Khan's initial assaults,
Wow.
suggesting a powerful and well-established defense. What does this initial stalemate tell you about the balance of power between these two forces?
It sets up a real David and Goliath scenario.
Yeah.
But with elemental magic instead of a slingshot.
All right.
But of course, Genghis Khan doesn't just keep throwing his forces against the lightning. He comes up with a remarkably creative siege strategy using his earth magic.
Right.
Forget conventional siege weaponry.
Forget it.
He opts for a much more geological approach.
Precisely. Instead of directly attacking the lightning-wielding sorcerer
Right.
or trying to breach the formidable walls,
Yeah.
he utilizes his earth magic to manipulate the subterranean water sources,
Oh, wow.
forcing them to the surface.
Oh.
This ingeniously turns the ground surrounding the city walls
Uh-huh.
into a vast and treacherous muddy quagmire,
Wow.
causing the very foundations of the city to sink and crumble.
Oh, my gosh.
It's a brilliant, if environmentally devastating strategy
Yeah.
that renders the sorcerer's lightning virtually useless.
Right.
After all, how effective can lightning be against a sea of mud?
You really can.
It really forces you to think about how different types of power interact and neutralize each other.
The image of these once imposing walls slowly sinking into the mud is incredibly vivid. And it inevitably leads to the city's surrender.
Right.
And the sorcerer priest's desperate plea for mercy.
Right.
Something that, based on the narrative, Genghis Khan was not particularly known for granting.
No. The story strongly implies that while Genghis Khan's methods forged a vast and enduring empire,
Right.
they were far from merciful.
Right.
The harsh and unforgiving nature of the steppes themselves seems to be reflected in his rule.
Yeah.
The conclusion of this first wizarding probe really drives home the idea
Okay.
that a new kind of power,
Yeah.
elemental magic wielded with ruthless ambition and strategic thinking,
Right?
could completely overturn traditional power structures
Yeah.
and leave even the most established rulers trembling.
It's pretty amazing.
It's a compelling reimagining of a pivotal historical figure, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. It makes you look at historical accounts with a whole new level of what if.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Shifting our wizarding probe entirely,
Okay.
we now turn our attention to a very different setting
Okay.
and a very different kind of magically empowered ruler.
Right.
Ivan the Fourth, famously known as Ivan the Terrible.
Yes.
But in this flash fiction story, Tsar of Snow and Blood,
Yes.
his terror comes with a distinctly chilling, icy edge.
Yes. This story reimagines Ivan the Terrible as a Tsar who commands the power of ice magic.
Okay.
And the narrative wastes no time in establishing his formidable reputation.
Right.
And how he utilizes his icy abilities to sow fear and solidify his often tenuous rule.
Yeah.
Following his father's less impactful reign.
Okay.
The detail about the frozen statues of executed traitors standing in the throne room is a particularly striking and unsettling image.
It is.
What kind of message do you think that sends to his court?
It's a pretty clear message, isn't it?
Yeah.
A constant, chilling reminder of the consequences of disloyalty.
Yeah, for sure.
Apparently, in this reimagined history, ice-based public shaming proves to be a more effective, or at least more visually arresting deterrent than traditional executions.
Much more interesting.
Who knew?
Who knew?
But into this frozen court arrives Anya of Ryazan.
Oh, yeah.
The last descendant of a lineage of fire mages.
Okay.
She comes seeking vengeance, but arrives under the guise of a bride.
Right.
Talk about walking into the heart of the enemy.
Yep.
Or should we say the ice palace?
Right. So the fundamental contrast between Anya and Ivan is absolutely central to this narrative.
Okay.
Her fire magic is the polar opposite of his ice.
Right.
And her arrival as a bride, concealing a burning agenda of revenge,
Right.
immediately injects a powerful tension into the story.
Yeah.
She embodies the very element that his power seeks to suppress.
Yeah.
A spark of defiance seeking to ignite in a frozen world.
It's a great image.
What does this initial dynamic suggest about the potential for conflict and perhaps even an unexpected connection between them?
It hints at a volatile and potentially transformative relationship.
Yeah.
Their wedding night is described as a battlefield of a different sort.
Right.
A clash not of armies, but of ice and flame.
Right.
That sounds incredibly dramatic and intimate at the same time.
It is portrayed as a thrilling and dangerous dance of their respective powers.
Yeah.
Each testing the other's magical boundaries and limitations.
Yeah.
But the story also hints at a more complex interaction.
Okay.
With Anya's fire, perhaps offering Ivan a rare warmth in his isolated existence.
Right.
And his ice potentially providing a balm for the inherent destructive nature of her flames.
Wow.
It suggests a dynamic that goes beyond mere opposition.
Right.
Perhaps even a strange kind of equilibrium or interdependence.
Yeah.
What do you make of that initial, almost paradoxical connection?
It's intriguing.
Yeah.
It suggests that even opposing forces can find a point of balance.
Right.
Or at least a mutual fascination.
For sure.
And this seems to translate into their rule, at least in the beginning.
Nope.
Anya's whispered prophecies, combined with Ivan's overt displays of ice magic,
Right.
create this seemingly invincible power dynamic within the court.
Exactly. They effectively rule through a combination of fear and perceived foresight,
Right.
feeding on the anxieties of the boyars.
Right.
Anya's prophecies add another layer of control,
Okay.
suggesting a manipulation that extends beyond just brute magical force.
Right.
This period of their reign really highlights the effectiveness of their initial alliance.
Yeah.
A fusion of ice and fire working in tandem to maintain their authority.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if such seemingly opposing forces can ever truly coexist in the long term
Right.
without one eventually seeking dominance.
And as is so often the case in tales of power and ambition,
Right.
betrayal begins to simmer beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Ivan's trusted advisor, Yuri, emerges as the instigator,
Yuri?
skillfully manipulating Anya with promises of greater power.
Right.
What are his motivations?
Yuri essentially represents the old guard, the powerful boyar families, who likely resented Ivan's absolute rule.
Yeah.
And perhaps also feared Anja's growing influence.
Right.
And the disruption she represented to the established order.
Okay.
He preys on Anya's ambition,
Right.
her desire to restore her family's legacy and reclaim a position of power,
Okay.
subtly turning her against Ivan by whispering promises of the throne,
Oh.
and painting Ivan as an obstacle to her own aspirations.
Right.
He exploits the inherent tensions between tradition and change.
Yeah.
What does this tell you about the vulnerabilities that even the most powerful rulers face?
It highlights that internal threats and the manipulation of ambition can be just as dangerous as external enemies.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Ivan discovers Anya wielding stolen magic,
Oh, no.
an ancient scepter,
Yeah.
alongside Yuri.
Yeah,
That's got to be a devastating revelation.
it's the ultimate betrayal on multiple levels.
Yeah.
The ancient scepter likely represents a significant amplification of Anya's power,
Right.
fueled by magic that wasn't her own. Seeing her, the person he seemingly trusted,
Yeah.
allied with his own advisor in a clear act of treachery,
Yeah.
must have been a profound blow to Ivan,
Right.
shattering any illusion of a stable and loyal court.
Right.
It ignites the central conflict of the story, moving from a subtle power play to open warfare.
In response, Ivan doesn't engage in direct confrontation.
He doesn't.
He unleashes a blizzard and retreats to the frozen north.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he's drawing strength and solace from the very element he commands.
Precisely, his ice magic becomes not just a weapon, but a means of survival and escape.
Right.
The blizzard serves as both a tactical retreat, masking his movements, and a potent demonstration of his intrinsic connection to the cold.
Yeah.
The story also mentions the trail of icy despair he leaves in his wake, emphasizing the destructive emotional impact of his grief and rage, which manifests physically through his magic. It makes you consider how deeply emotions can be intertwined with magical abilities in these kinds of narratives.
And while Ivan is out in the frozen wilderness, Anya's fiery power is escalating.
It is.
Leaving a trail of destruction as she relentlessly pursues him.
Right.
It sounds like their powers are growing in direct opposition, each fueling the other's intensity.
Yes. Their separation and the betrayal seem to act as catalysts for their respective powers. Ivan becomes more primal.
Right.
Drawing strength directly from the frozen land itself. Becoming almost an embodiment of the winter landscape.
Right.
Meanwhile, Anya's fire intensifies. Fueled by the stolen magic of the scepter and her burning ambition for control. The story sets the stage for a final dramatic confrontation.
Wow.
A true clash of elemental titans.
Which fittingly takes place on a desolate glacier.
Yeah.
The perfect arena for a battle between ice and fire.
Right.
The story emphasizes the stark visual of their duel, largely silent amidst the chaos of their armies clashing in the background.
The imagery of fire and ice, locked in a deadly silent dance against the backdrop of raging armies, is incredibly powerful. The silence of their personal conflict underscores the deeply personal nature of their struggle. A battle for power revenge. And perhaps even the remnants of that initial unexpected connection they share. It highlights the idea that even amidst large-scale conflict, the core of many battles lies in the individual confrontations and their underlying motivations.
And it seems Ivan attempts to finally end things by entombing Anya in ice.
He does.
But she manages to break free.
But she does.
Making a pact with an ancient and hungry force that amplifies her fire magic to an almost unimaginable level through the scepter?
Right.
This scepter clearly holds immense power.
It does. Anya's pact with this ancient force represents her willingness to embrace a darker, perhaps corrupting power. In her desperate pursuit of victory. The scepter acts as a conduit, channeling and intensifying her fire magic. Transforming her into an even more formidable and dangerous opponent for Ivan. But also potentially at a great personal cost. What do you think are the dangers of wielding power that isn't truly one's own?
It often comes with a terrible price, it seems. And in this case, it appears to consume Anya entirely.
A pillar of flame.
A pillar of flame.
That's a pretty definitive and visually striking end.
It is a dramatic and ultimately tragic end for Anya. She is consumed by the very power she sought to control.
Wow.
Reduced to nothing but ashes. Ivan survives the encounter, but the story poignantly notes that his victory tasted like ashes. He is left as the Tsar of Ice, forever marked by his intense and destructive battle with the fire mage.
Wow.
It's a haunting conclusion that underscores the destructive potential of unchecked ambition. And the lasting scars left by such elemental conflicts.
So you and I have just completed our wizarding probe.
Into two truly captivating flash fiction stories.
That's right.
Witnessing the raw and often terrifying might of elemental magic and the chilling and fiery conflicts it can ignite.
For sure.
When you consider these tales.
Think
about how they explored timeless themes of power, ambition, and the often unpredictable nature of magic itself. What aspects of these reimagined accounts of Genghis Khan and Ivan the Terrible resonated most with you? What other historical figures or pivotal events do you think might be fascinating to explore through a similar magical lens? These fantastical narratives offer just sparks to ignite your own imagination.
Absolutely.
Until our next wizarding probe on You Son of a Witch. Keep those fantastical thoughts brewing.
Keep them brewing.
And don't forget to rate and follow the show for more thrilling explorations into the world of flash fiction.
More of that good stuff.